Hi everyone, welcome or welcome back. My name is Kate and I am a knitter based in Canada. And like any normal person, I have a lot of opinions about yarn. This is kind of an impromptu video. I just kind of realized that I've been knitting for a little over a year now. I started in like November of 2024, I think, maybe October. And in that time, I've been making a real effort to try as many yarns as possible. And the goal there has been like to figure out my own preferences and to find these yarns that I want to keep going back to again and again in the future. So just to give you an idea of what my preferences are, just so that you can figure out whether your preferences might be aligned. For me, my number one is that the yarn needs to wear well. If the yarn starts pilling within like the first month of me finishing something, it makes me a little bit frustrated based on how much time I spent on it. And because for me, sustainability is a big part of why I knit. My second most important thing is definitely that the yarn needs to be comfortable. When it comes to sustainability, similar to that, I need to be making pieces that I actually reach for in my wardrobe, otherwise there isn't much of a point to them. So for my tier list, my number one category is tried and true. For a yarn to be tried and true, I need to have bought it and used it multiple times, been really happy with the experience, and would buy it again and use it again in the future. My next category is would buy it again. This one, very similar, but I maybe don't have as much experience with the yarn. So maybe I've only used it once, but I loved it so much that I am eager to try it again, and in the future it might get to that tried and true category. Next we have, if I had it, I would use it, but I probably wouldn't go repurchase it again. This is sort of like the meh category. Like, there might not be anything wrong with the yarn, but I just didn't love it to the extent that I would go buy it. The reasoning for that might be that I know that there's a better alternative that I have since found, or it might just be that I want to try an alternative that I have heard about and that like I didn't love this one enough to stick to it over that. Next category is the first like negative one. This is not for me. Not for me might be for two different reasons. If something is not comfy, as we discussed, not something I'm going to reach for in the future. Similarly, if it wasn't nice to work with, like for whatever reason, if a yarn wasn't fun to work with, for me the process of knitting is just as important as the finished object. So if I didn't enjoy the experience, I won't be getting it in the future. And finally, you probably saw this one coming, but the last category is something not wearing well. Again, if it's pilling after a short amount of time, if I don't think it's going to stand up long term, there's no way that I will be purchasing it in the future. Now, I should say it's possible that some things fall into like a couple of different categories, so I'll be putting things into the category that they fit in best. But yeah, let's get right into it. I've got my list of yarns here. I will say that I've only put commercial yarns on here, so anything that's like hand-dyed superwash kind of yarn, not in this list. And I've sort of tried to categorize this. So we're going to start with what I call regular yarns. These are mostly wool yarns, and I've sorted them from roughly lightest weight yarn to heaviest weight. And then after that, we'll get into more specialty yarns, things like blown yarns, sock yarns, and mohair. So we are going to start with, we'll talk about two of these at once actually, because they're so similar, it's hard not to talk about them in the same context. Sandnes Garn Sunday and Knitting for Olive Merino. So the Sandnes Garn Sunday, actually both of them, fingering weight merino yarns, very commonly held with a mohair. I've pulled out some swatches here to give you a bit of context for these. This swatch is the Knitting for Olive Merino held with a mohair. And this is going to be a sweater quite soon. I've never actually used this combination for a garment before. This will be my first time, but I'm really looking forward to it because I have used it in the past for gift knits, accessories, And I've even used it as like baby knits for like baby balaclavas, and the babies and toddlers haven't had any kind of sensitivities to it. So this is very soft, very drapey. And honestly, if I was like holding a Sunday in one hand and knitting for Olive Merino in the other hand, I'm not sure I'd be able to tell the difference. Maybe like very slightly, but not enough for me to pick one over the other. For me, the reason that I would pick one over the other is that this is very subjective, but for me, the Knitting for Olive one has a better color range. So for that reason alone, if I needed a fingering weight merino, I would be going to Knitting for Olive first. So for that reason, Sunday is going into, if I had it, and I would use it. And actually I do have some and will be using it because I've got a vest that I have made in the past, which is using Sunday but held double to make a DK. I don't wear the vest. It's a great vest, but I simply don't wear it. So I'm planning to frog it, and I will happily use that yarn again. But in terms of like shopping in the future, I would go for the Knitting for Olive one, which I've used several times in the past. Therefore, it's going into tried and true. Big fan of both of those yarns. Okay, after that we have a kind of different one. This is, again, a fingering weight, but it is not merino. And this is Sandnes Garn Tynn Pure Gynt. This is a Norwegian wool. And I do have a swatch of this one. This is like the fingering weight version of their regular Pure Gynt. And I actually used this one first. This is a swatch for a sweater that I made that is Tynn Pure Gynt held with a mohair alternative to make like a DK, maybe even a worsted weight, honestly. Really, really nice. I kind of did this by accident, that I kind of stumbled into such a good yarn combination. We'll get to the mohair alternative later, but the Tynn Pure Gynt in a cable sweater like this one gave the cable some really nice structure, but then the mohair alternative gives it a really nice drape and like lightness to it. So for a specific case where you want that like happy medium between structure and drape, Tynn Pure Gynt, very, very good option. And I've only ever used it this one time, but I would absolutely reach for it again in the future if I wanted like a fingering weight yarn that wasn't like a super soft merino type thing. So based on that, easily this is going into wood buy again. And next we have, we're getting more and more rustic here actually. So this is, I'm gonna say, the last fingering weight one in this list. And this will also be the first one where I really struggle with the pronunciation. I am so sorry. And by the way, thank you to anyone in the past who has corrected my pronunciation on something. I genuinely appreciate it, love learning. I will say that maybe only 50% of it sticks in my brain, so I'm doing my best. This next one is Hjelholts Uldspinderi Dansk Pelsuld, and this is a Danish yarn, quite rustic, fingering weight. I bought this in, I think, Oslo. Yes, I bought it in Oslo when I was there on a work trip, and I used it in a colorwork sweater. Loved the experience of using it in a sweater. I feel like the rusticness of this, it gives it like a really good structure to it and really good stitch definition. It was just like a really nice experience. Unfortunately, it's like not quite comfortable next to skin for me. When I do wear this, which is unfortunately not very often, I wear like a long sleeve t-shirt underneath it. So yeah, for context, I would draw my line for comfort somewhere between Tynn Pure Gynt and regular Pure Gynt and this Hjelholts Uldspinderi. So for me, this is going into not for me, just based on comfort. However, it's a really, really nice yarn. And actually, I could see myself using it in the future for mittens. I think that would be really nice. Or really anything where I don't need to worry about like next to skin comfort. Cardigan too, I think would be a really good idea. Or maybe like a vest where you're always planning to wear something underneath it. So next we have very similar yarn. This is Hillesvag Vilje. This is a Norwegian yarn. It is listed as a fingering weight. However, I've just used it for the first time, and I would consider it a sport weight, like pretty confidently. I could not get a fingering weight gauge with this, and I ended up making sport weight mittens with it. Very, very happy with the result. This is a Norwegian lamb's wool yarn, so it's rustic, it's toothy, but it is like softer than a lot of Norwegian wool that you might find. And very nice result. I also think that the sort of rusticness and toothiness of it makes it quite warm, which is nice for mittens. I have one complaint with this yarn, and granted I didn't use it in a garment, so I do suspect that in a garment it would not be comfortable next to skin. It's very similar in feel to the last one that we talked about. My one complaint with this is that it was so toothy that it sort of wanted to stick to itself as I was working with it. So like doing color work, I was working with one strand of each color, and the two strands would like want to stick to each other, and there was like some friction there, and that was really messing with my tension. So unfortunately, this one is also going into not for me. I say unfortunately because looking at my ranking right here, I want to be the kind of person that loves these very rustic yarns, but just being honest with myself, in the future, if I want like a rustic-ish yarn, I would go for the Tynn Pure Gynt, which to be clear is nowhere near as rustic, just also not a merino, sort of like happy medium. That brings us into our sport weight yarns that are actually listed as sport weight. The first one here is Isager Tweed. Isager Tweed is actually another souvenir yarn for me. I picked this up in Sweden on that same Scandinavia trip, and this is a pretty interesting yarn. This is 70% wool and 30% mohair. The other interesting thing about it is that it's a very uneven thickness. I actually didn't mind that for what I was doing. I was just doing a stockinette vest with it, held with a mohair, so that didn't bother me at all. I didn't find that it changed like my gauge too much throughout the garment. However, I think there are certain cases, like maybe with color work, where it would really bother me. Maybe cables as well, actually. But yeah, for what I was doing, I found it lovely. The 30% mohair also, I think, gives it like some like softness to it. Softness is the wrong word, almost more like smoothness. Like it's a very smooth yarn. And I really enjoyed the process. I'm putting this one into would buy again. That being said, it would have to be for a pretty specific use case. I think it would probably be something else stockinette. Obviously, it would be something where I would want that tweedy look. And it's also worth noting that this is on the pricier side. Isager tends to be in a slightly higher price range than a lot of these yarns we've been talking about. So I used it in the past for a vest, which I think was a really good use case because obviously you don't have to buy as much of it. Next up, we have Lana Grossa Ecopuno. This is another kind of interesting one in terms of composition. So this is another sport weight yarn. This one is 72% cotton, 17% wool, and 11% alpaca. And I have a swatch for this one as well. This is the swatch. I find that really interesting because 72% cotton to me says like, okay, this is almost like a cotton merino. It should be nice for like a summery garment. However, what I have learned from making a tank top with this is that the alpaca content gives it almost a kind of fuzziness which is not nice for summer. So I would use this again in the future. However, it would be for something very specific. It would have to be like, maybe a cardigan with this would be really, really nice, but it would have to be a sport weight cardigan. I think it would be nice doing color work with. So yeah, even just talking this through, I would use it again, but it would have to be a very specific use case, not a summer garment, not again. And to be honest, if I was looking for something in that sort of sport weight, almost a summery yarn kind of thing, I would probably start looking at cotton merinos rather than this kind of cotton wool plus alpaca situation. It's just very specific. That being said, very nice next to skin. Very, very soft. I'm actually planning to frog the garment that I originally made with this and turn it into a scarf, and I'm very excited for that. So any kind of scarf or shawl might be another good use case for it. But yeah, again, very specific. For that reason, I'm putting it into, if I had it, I would use it. So that one being not quite a summer yarn, we are now going to talk about the only actual summer yarn on this list. So the next one on the list is Sandnes Garn Line. Sandnes Garn Line is a 53% cotton, 33% viscose, and 14% linen. So very summery. If you haven't worked with a summer yarn before like this one, the only word I can think to describe it is dry. Like, there's no like sort of what I want to say is like puffiness that you get from like a wool yarn where it sort of like expands and has some elasticity. Nothing like that to these sort of cotton summer yarns. I also find that they're quite splitty. I say they, but I've only used this one. I have heard, though, that Drops Bell and I feel like there's another one that people compare it to. It's been so long since I've thought about summer yarns. We are now into February. I haven't seen the sun in so long. I have used Sandnes Garn Line to make a tank top and also a sort of long sleeve t-shirt. And I was very surprised by how much I like that long sleeve t-shirt situation. It's sort of like a sweater for days that are a little bit too warm to actually be wearing wool like this. And I've really enjoyed that. Also, using it for color work, it has incredible stitch definition. My only complaint with this is that from a process perspective, it is quite splitty, and the dryness is like not always nice to work with. That being said, I don't think that's the yarn's fault. I think that that's just something that comes with the territory of using a sort of cotton linen yarn like this one. I would be interested in trying Drops Bell in the future. I don't think that the color range, though, is quite as nice as Sandnes Garn Line, but it's obviously a more like budget-friendly option. So based on all of that, Sandnes Garn Line is going into tried and true. And that brings us to Pure Gynt. So this is the DK weight version of Tynn Pure Gynt that we talked about earlier. I used this held alone to make a cardigan this year. That's the only time that I've used it, but I really, really enjoyed it. It seems to be wearing very, very well, maybe like minimal pilling, despite the fact that I've worn it a lot, and very nice to work with, and just nice enough next to skin, I would say. Like, I wouldn't put it on and say, oh, this is soft, but I wouldn't put it on and say, oh, this is scratchy at all. So I've really, really enjoyed that yarn. I'm actually excited to work with it again in the future. One note on it is that it's listed as a DK weight, but it's quite heavy for a DK weight. I would say it could pass as a worsted weight in a pinch. It's sort of like right in between DK and worsted weight. Okay, so based on that, I'm putting it into wood buy again. I could very easily see it going up to tried and true the next time that I use it. Which brings us to the next one, which is Knitting for Olive Heavy Merino. This one is the worsted weight version of Knitting for Olive Merino, which we talked about earlier. I think that the color range for this one isn't quite as wide, but it's still like a beautiful selection of colors if you're into the more like muted colors, dusty colors like I am. Knitting for Olive is just the place to go for that. One thing to note about this is that it is not as, I sort of hesitate to say that it's not as soft as the fingering weight version because it is still very soft. It's just in a different way. The garment I'm wearing right now is actually the first thing that I have made with Knitting for Olive Heavy Merino. And my experience with it, the only word that I can think of to describe it and the difference between, this is actually a ball of the regular merino, the only difference that I can think of between this and this is that the heavy merino is dry. Like it feels dry when you work with it, it feels dry when you wear it. And that's really the only way I can think to describe that difference. It's not, I wouldn't say that it's scratchier or itchier, anything like that. It's just drier. It almost feels similar to when you're working with like one of those cotton summer yarns. It almost has that quality of like slipperiness almost. So that being said, love the heavy merino and I love this garment. I also found that it went a long way. Like I was surprised by how little yarn that I used for this sweater and therefore how light it was. Like, I think for this, I just broke into the 10th ball of yarn that I had for it, and I could have gotten away with 9. And this was a quite oversized garment. It also seems to be wearing incredibly. Like, I've had this for about a month now. I've worn it maybe like every other day. I do not see a single pill looking at it right now. Absolutely nothing to indicate it's been worn. It's also been softening with wear quite a lot, which is really nice. This is another one that I am going to put into the would buy again category, but can easily see it going up to a tried and true in the future. Okay, next up we have another very specific one that I use for very specific use cases. It's another worsted weight, and this is Berroco Vintage. This one is a 52% acrylic, 40% wool, 8% nylon. This is what I use for any kind of like baby knit, baby blankets. I've used it to make a dog sweater in the past. Basically any time that I know that like the care for it won't be on par with a wool yarn for like a dog or a baby. Berroco Vintage is what I've been using for that, and I find that it's like, you can kind of tell when you're working with it that it's like an acrylic yarn or an acrylic blend, but it is still quite nice to work with. You can still tell that wool content is there, and it blocks really nicely. Yeah, I've been really happy with working with this in the past. Good budget option as well. So this one's actually going into tried and true because I have used it a lot for these gift knits. That being said, very specific use case. I wouldn't be picking this up to like make myself a garment like this one, just really for gift knits. Which brings us to another budget-friendly worsted weight yarn, which is Cascade 220. This one is 100% wool. I don't believe that it is merino, but you could probably trick me into thinking that it's merino because it is that soft. This is a complicated one for me. I have used this multiple times. I've used it held with a mohair alternative to make a cardigan. I've used it held single to make a sweater, and I've used it held single to make a vest. I'm very happy with 2 of those garments. I'm not very happy with the one with the sweater where it was held alone. I was happy with it at first, however, it has started not wearing very well. So I could put this in like 3 different categories, to be honest, looking at my list. It's absolutely a tried and true because I've used it so much and I've been happy with the results. It's nice to work with. It's a great budget option. However, it's also not wearing very well, but if I had it, I would use it. So this goes into several different categories. I'm gonna put it into not wearing well just because in terms of recommending things to you guys, I need to be very honest about that. However, the more that I think about this, I think that there are still specific use cases that I would be happy to use this for. I think that in the vest that I have, it's wearing fine. And I think that when it is held with a mohair or mohair alternative, it also seems to be wearing fine. The specific issue that I seem to have with it is when it is in a sweater, sort of like this one, which is obviously a different yarn, but in a sweater, especially with a sweater with texture to it, there inevitably ends up being more friction because the sweater is going to rub on itself. In a vest, that isn't really the case because the friction would be like skin on the yarn. So I do think I would use it for a vest again in the future. I also think I would use it if I was holding it with something else. I would just be wary of using it held single in a sweater, especially if I was expecting longevity. That being said, amazing feel next to skin, great budget option. I have a lot of good things to say about this yarn, just a little bit of hesitation, and for that reason, it is going, unfortunately, into not wearing well. Next up, we have a yarn that actually kind of has a similar feel to it, and it is the Filcolana Peruvian wool. This one is sort of like a worsted / Aran weight yarn. And I used this to make 2 gift knits for my dad. I used it to make a colorwork scarf and a hat. So 2 winter accessories, and that was a gift for not this past Christmas, but the previous one. So this was like one of the first things I made when I got into knitting. Very, very soft. I actually picked it up as the gift knit because it was so soft I had no worries that it would be uncomfortable next to skin or anything. I hadn't really considered at the time, because of my lack of experience, the wearability of it. I hadn't really been considering like pilling or anything. That being said, I've been kind of pleasantly surprised with how it wears. When I do see the scarf and hat, I swear my dad has worn those probably every winter day for the past 2 winters now, and very minimal pilling from what I can see. So I would actually be interested in using this again in the future for a garment or accessories for myself. I would definitely be interested in picking that up. I also think that Filcolana, in really all of their yarns, has a really nice color palette, so there's a lot to choose from there. So for that reason, that is going into would buy again 100%. I probably will be buying it again. Okay, and next up we have the last yarn in the sort of regular yarn category, I think is what I'm calling it. This is an Aran weight yarn, Drops Alaska. And this is, yeah, the first Drops yarn that I have on this list. There's definitely a few of them. Drops Alaska is just a 100% wool. I think what I've said in the past about it is that it's nothing to write home about. It's really just wool. Probably not like the widest color range out there. I have used this for 2 garments though. I've done a vest and a sweater, and I'm very happy with the result of each. And I'm very happy with how they are wearing. Specifically that sweater, I have been so happy with as a really warm garment. This is a very heavy yarn. If my memory serves me right, I think that I used like 17 balls of this yarn to make that, granted, very oversized sweater. But it means that it's like so nice and heavy to put on the coldest days. So I've been very, very happy with that result. And this is a very good budget-friendly option for sure. So Drops Alaska is going into my tried and true category. probably the best budget option on this entire list in terms of like something budget friendly where you still get good durability. Oh, and that one is also fine next to skin. No concerns there. I would say it's maybe slightly less scratchy than a pure Gynt is how I would describe it. Like maybe somewhere in between Cascade 220 and pure Gynt. Okay, so now we're getting into the more specialty yarns. We're gonna start with the, I'm gonna say blown yarns. This is where things start to get complicated, I think. The first one we are going to talk about is Sandnes Garn Kos. This one is a 62% alpaca, 29% nylon, and 9% wool. So quite a lot of alpaca, also quite a lot of nylon to it. So if you're unfamiliar with this type of yarn, it's basically a chainette structure that in this case is the nylon, and then the fibers, in this case wool and alpaca, are like blown into it, so it makes for this nice fluffiness. I have used this to make a sweater in the past. I am planning to frog it and make a scarf instead. Not because of the yarn itself, just because of my preferences and whatever. So this is the swatch that I have for that sweater that I made previously. And in this swatch, I did hold it with a mohair. And as you can see, very, very fluffy. My first reaction to this sweater, though, is that it was surprisingly not comfortable next to skin. I really expected it to be like soft and fluffy. And I would say that you can kind of feel the nylon, which is not a feeling that I love. It's almost like got a dryness to it, if that makes sense. And almost a scratchiness as well. Like it's just not quite the level of softness that I would expect from the appearance of it, if that makes sense. Yeah, and I actually don't know that the effect that I get from this is any like fluffier or nicer than like if I were to hold a worsted weight or a DK weight along with a mohair. I think something like Cascade 220 held with a mohair would give a kind of similar effect to this, but maybe more softness, which is kind of unfortunate. So this one is going into, if I had it, I would use it for sure, but it's not quite up to my expectations, and I wouldn't go looking for it in the future. Okay, I just went to go grab a yarn because it was within arm's reach of me. This next one is Sandnes Garn Poppy. This is another one of those blown yarns, but this one does not have the nylon or acrylic, anything like that content to it. This one's pretty interesting. It is 50% alpaca, 35% cotton, and 15% wool. So I believe that the chainette part of it is the cotton. And based on that, it feels nice and strong, and there is none of that plasticky feeling. It just feels so nice and soft. I have actually not made anything for myself with this. This was another one of my very early knits, and I made a hood for my mom as a gift knit. And I think this was a great option for an accessory and for a gift knit because, again, subjective, but I can't imagine really anyone being sensitive to this with that cotton content. I guess unless you are specifically sensitive to alpaca. Now, two things I would say about this. I don't think that Sandnes Garn has a very wide color range for this, just based on the fact that it's a newer yarn. And I also think it's on the more pricey side compared to the other Sandnes Garn options. That's really just from my memory. So personally, I probably wouldn't go buy like a full sweater quantity of this, but I could see the appeal. If there was like a really nice color and or it was on sale, this would be a really nice soft sweater. And I actually need to think of something to do with this one in my hand, which is a little less than one ball of it. Let me know what you would do with this if you had maybe like 40 grams of a very soft, fluffy yarn. Okay, so based on all of that, really nice, really soft yarn, but not the best color range and maybe a little pricey, that is going into, if I had it, I would use it, which I will. Okay, and last blown yarn. This one is Drops Air. If you watched my Everything I Knit in 2025 video, you can probably see where this one is going. This is a 65% alpaca, 28% nylon, and 7% merino yarn. By the way, those two previous blown yarns are listed as bulky weight. This one is listed as Aran weight. However, with all of these blown yarns, they're so lightweight in terms of like number of grams that I do think you can get away with a tighter gauge than what they are listed as. My guess would be like worsted weight. But you could do like Aran or bulky if you wanted like a more open gauge. Anyway, Drops Air. I used this to make a sweater. This is interesting actually because it is a very, very similar composition to the Kos that I listed, but with this, I do not get that plasticky feel to it. I cannot like immediately feel the nylon. There's no scratchiness. It is so nice next to skin. So it's a completely different complaint from what I had with the Kos. This one, I would actually say feels more similar to the poppy, which is interesting. But this has not been wearing well at all. If you watched my Everything I Knit in 2025 video, you would have seen me standing there and like picking pills off of it. I wouldn't even say they're pills. It's almost like the sweater is shedding. And it's been the most like frustrating experience because basically I do not reach for this garment as like a nice hand knit sweater that I get to wear. I almost reach for this similar to how you would reach for like a crew neck sweater, like a cozy, like thrifted crew neck sweater that you don't like care too much for. You don't expect it to last too long, but it's cozy and you're wearing it because it's warm. That's how I would describe this yarn, which is kind of frustrating. I will say that I've heard people who feel very differently about this yarn and have not had any issues with pilling and really find it to be a like tried and true. I am jealous of those people because I think this would be really nice to do like color work with. Also to do like accessories. I would love to have like a shawl or like a really nice scarf in this kind of fluffy blown yarn, but Drops Air is not the one that I would go for. So based on that, obviously this is going into not wearing well. I am interested in trying Camarose Midnatssol, I think it's called. I've heard good things about that one. I would be curious if any of you have thoughts on that or any other blown yarns based on what I've discussed here about the 3 that I have tried. Okay, should we do sock yarns? Let's do sock yarns. Okay. So I have 5 sock yarns on this list. They are all quite different. So the first one here is Lana Sockenwolle. This one is not my favorite sock yarn. It's fine. It's absolutely fine. I would say similar to a couple of the yarns that I've mentioned previously, it's almost like I can feel the nylon content in it, like almost as if there are like nylon fibers in it that are like just a little more apparent than in other sock yarns. Nothing wrong with it, makes a solid sock, but the ones that we're going to talk about next have turned out better for me. That one is going into not for me, which there's nothing really wrong with it. It probably could go into if I had it, I would use it, but I certainly won't be picking it up in the future. Another thing to note about that one actually is that it's sold in 100-gram balls, which is sometimes nice in terms of like value, but if you're trying to do like color work, you do end up with a weird amount of leftovers. Okay, next, very different sock yarn. We're going to talk about Filcolana Arwetta. This one is a merino and nylon blend, and it gives like a very different result. I've only used this for one pair of socks, but it just gives the nicest, like soft, drapey sock. I'm not sure about the durability of this one. I haven't worn it a ton, and that is because I expect with the merino, it might not wear the best. However, I wouldn't pick up a yarn like that expecting it to wear well, if that makes sense. I think it's for like a very specific use case of like sort of a nice, almost like dainty lace sock. Or what I'm planning to do with it next, actually, I have a couple plans for what I want to do with Filcolana Arwetta in the future. I'm thinking light fingering weight mittens. It would be really nice and like soft and drapey and silky. The other thing I want to do with it is a garment. I want to hold it double and have almost like a DK weight garment that is merino but has some durability from the nylon. And it just has such a nice drape that I think that'll be really nice. So based on that one, obviously this one is going into would buy it again. I already have plans to, and it's a really, really nice yarn. And similar to the last Filcolana one, really nice color range too. Lots of options to pick from. And next, we have Sandnes Garn Sisu. Sisu is, I think, Sandnes Garn's like main sock yarn. I had one issue with this, which is that I found it was actually, I think like quantitatively, so like objectively, it was a little bit heavier than other sock yarns. So it wasn't like, definitely not like a sport weight or anything, but it's just a slightly fewer meters per gram, I think is how that would work out. And that did mean that the sock I made with it turned out like a little bit bigger than I was expecting. That being said, it does make for like a nice, like fluffy kind of sock with like almost like a nice density to it. Really, really nice and cozy sock. So it is something that I'm planning to use again in the future. I would just keep in mind that I might need to like size down or go down a needle size to deal with it being a little bit heavier, but it ends up giving like a nice thick and soft sock, which I really like. And I would say like decent color range, definitely not the absolute best on this list, but good enough, and I would absolutely buy it again. And next up we have, I think, definitely my favorite sock yarn. Next we're going with West Yorkshire Spinner's Signature 4-ply. I have used this in the past to do socks for myself, as well as mittens as a gift knit. And I'm currently working on, actually I finished one of them, I can show you. Currently working on mittens for myself. I've really been enjoying like reusing some of my previous favorite sock yarns as a mitten option as well. So this is a mitten done in obviously fingering weight West Yorkshire Spinners. Really good excuse to reuse some of those colors. You reuse some of the leftovers. And this just gives like, it's such an easy yarn to work with, a nice stitch definition. This one is an interesting composition for the yarn because it's a pretty standard composition, but then the wool is made of both regular wool as well as blue-faced Leicester content. And the BFL content is quite, I guess, rustic. It definitely doesn't feel like scratchy or anything, but it definitely feels quite like durable, which is why I had the thought of using it for mittens. Two very small gripes that I have with this yarn. Color range, not fantastic, but I'm obsessed with this color combination. So there's definitely like really good options within the range, just not like a ton of them. Second very small gripe. I'm looking for the second mitten right now so I can show you. This is another one that comes in 100-gram balls, which again is actually very nice for value. But if you're doing something with like a color work mitten, it means that your whip looks like this, but then you need to shove all of this into a project bag. And I've considered actually like taking out like half of the ball or maybe even less to kind of minimize this, but I also don't want to break the yarn unnecessarily, so that's a little bit frustrating for color work, but again, very minor gripe. West Yorkshire Spinner's signature 4-ply, despite the small complaints, is 100% a tried and true. Can't be going into any other category. Next up we have Lang Jawoll, which is a pretty standard sock composition. It is a 75% Corriedale wool and then 25% nylon. I've actually got a sock right here that I finished recently. I haven't even woven in the ends yet. This is just like what I would consider to be a very standard sock yarn. Nothing like special, like with the West Yorkshire Spinners. The sort of special thing is the BFL content. With the Filcolana Arwetta, the special part is the merino and how soft it is. This is just like a solid sock yarn with a nice like range of color options as well. And there is one kind of interesting thing about it. Again, I'm reaching for the second, just like with the mitten. So this is a ball of Lang Jawoll that I am going to break into pretty soon. And the interesting part of this one, I'm going to mangle this yarn trying to get it out. There we go. So this is kind of hidden in the middle, and that is a spool of reinforcement thread. Now, there's two different things that you could do with the reinforcement thread. If anything at all, you don't have to use it. And actually, I'm not planning to use it for this sock here. The reinforcement thread is listed as a lace weight. However, just from looking at it, I think it's a little bit thicker than a lace weight. Like, it definitely looks a bit thicker than like a mohair. And the composition of this is 75% wool, 18% nylon, and 7% acrylic. So it has some really nice durability with it. And what you can do with it is hold it along with the regular yarn for parts of the sock where you're worried about durability. So like if you wear through the heel of your sock, you can add it there. If you wear through the toes of your sock, you can add it there. I did do that the first time that I worked with this yarn. I worked it into the heel, and I just found that it gave the heel kind of a weird thickness to it. Yeah, just based on the fact that you've got a fingering weight yarn and then what I suspect is heavier than a lace weight here, it means that you've got a fingering weight sock and then like a DK weight heel, which is a little bit weird. So what I plan to do with this in the future is to just hang on to this, and then I can use it for like darning if I ever have issues with holes in the sock in the future. So that is my plan. However, if I was making a sock for, like I sometimes need to wear work boots for my job, if I was doing something like that where like I was on my feet all day and the durability of the sock was really important, I would absolutely put it in the toe and the heel. So that is a very good option. So this is going into would buy again, 100%. Would be happy to buy it again as like a nice standard sock yarn, even just to have around. And that brings us finally to mohairs and mohair alternatives. We'll actually start with the alternatives, I think. So the first mohair alternative on my list is Camarose Midnatssol. To be clear, I'm not like particularly sensitive to mohair. So I don't need to be using the alternatives, but I did want to try them out and see if they were any different from the regular mohair strands. So I've got kind of a mix of the two on here. So Camarose Midnatssol, this is an alternative in that it is 54% alpaca, 36% tencel, and 10% merino. And this is actually the alternative that I held with this sweater, this swatch. So this is the one that gave a very nice drape to something kind of structured like the Tynn Gynt. And I was really happy with the result on this. I would say that the Midnattsol is like slightly thicker, slightly heavier than a regular merino rather than an alternative. And it doesn't have that kind of like silky feeling because there is obviously no silk in it, but it's still like a fantastic alternative to give it some fluffiness. I have no issues with like sensitivity next to skin for this. I just think that this is really, really nice. I also think that this bloomed really well with blocking. I don't know if that was down to the Tynn Pure Gynt or the Mohair alternative or the combination of the two, but I was really happy with this. Very good color range too, and it's been wearing very well. I don't think I have any signs of wear on that sweater. So this one is absolutely going into would buy again. I also believe that it's significantly less expensive than a lot of mohairs out there. So I would recommend looking into mohair alternatives in general if you want that kind of fluffiness, but maybe not like an actual mohair. Okay, this next one is interesting. The next one is Drops Brushed Alpaca Silk. This is interesting for a couple of reasons. The first one is that I forgot that I had ever used this. I realized as I was making this list for this video that in my Everything I Knit in 2025 video, I didn't mention this yarn at all. And when I was showing the cardigan that I used this in, I mistakenly thought that I had used the Midnattsol in it. But it wasn't. It was a completely different yarn. And I said in that video that I was a little bit confused by why I had issues with that cardigan. I'm pointing over there because it's on the bed. I was confused by why I had issues with the mohair alternative in the cardigan, but not this, and completely forgot that they were completely different yarns. So the Midnattsol, zero issues with it. The brushed alpaca silk, which is a very similar mohair alternative, however, kind of oddly, it is listed as like a worsted weight or something. It's not. It's just is similar to the Midnattsol, slightly heavier than a regular lace weight mohair. My one issue that I had working with it is that you see how on the Midnattsol swatch, I hope you will be able to see this, I wouldn't say at all that this is hairy. It's not hairy, it is just fluffy. Or fuzzy even. On the brushed alpaca silk, when I am wearing that garment, I am constantly finding basically hairs on it that are like at least an inch, maybe 2 inches long. So it gives less of like a fluffy appearance and more of like a hairy appearance, which is sort of a pet peeve of mine when it comes to alpaca. I feel like I've noticed that in the past. So yeah, I'm a little embarrassed that I forgot that I had ever used this yarn, but my experience with it wasn't great anyway. So this one is going into not wearing well because I keep finding hairs to pluck off of it. But I do think it's still like a decent budget alternative. 3 to go, and I think we'll go through these kind of quickly actually. These are the 3 actual like silk mohairs that I have used. The first one is the Knitting for Olive Soft Silk Mohair, which is in this swatch that I showed you earlier. Super nice, super drapey, just like with the Merino, incredible color palette. And like I was saying with this swatch, when I have used this for gift knits, even for babies, they have not had an issue with it. Obviously subjective and your mileage may vary, but I have been very, very happy with this mohair. So that one is absolutely going into tried and true. Next up we have Filcolana Tilia, which I haven't used a ton. I used this in a pair of mittens, a colorwork mitten, and I have since used it in a hat for myself. Both of those, obviously the hat is more relevant, but very nice next to skin, absolutely no issues there. And it's, I would say, like extra silky. Actually, looking at my notes here, it does have more silk. That would make sense. Actually, it's the same composition as the Knitting for Olive, which is 70% mohair, 30% silk, which is more silk than the one we will talk about next. But yeah, I would say that the Tilia feels silkier than the Knitting for Olive and has an excellent color range, but maybe not quite as wide a color range as the Knitting for Olive. So based on all of that, I'll definitely be using this again, maybe to like match with other Filcolana. Like I said, I want to use the Arwetta again. I want to use the Peruvian again. So I could definitely see myself picking up their mohair. And while we're at it, we're going to throw the Isager silk mohair into the same category. I have used that mohair to do a hat for myself as well as a vest. Again, absolutely no issues next to skin. It's nice and silky. This one does have less silk content. It's 75% mohair and 25% silk, but really, really nice. It has the, I would say, smallest color range of the mohairs that we've discussed, but the colors they do have are really nice. So I could see myself using that one again in the future, maybe if I was working with another Isager yarn and wanted to match it. Also, the Isager is definitely a little bit pricier, so in terms of budget options, I would look into the others or even the mohair alternatives that we talked about. Okay. That was a lot. I think that was like 27 yarns or something. So I'm looking at my list right now and just trying to see if I'm happy with the order of things and if there's any like caveats that I want to give. One thing I feel kind of weird about on this list is, of course, we discussed how Cascade 220 is in the last category, but really it could fit into a few different categories, and I could see myself using it again. I have used it several times, and I have a lot of good things to say about it. I also feel a little bit weird about having the Berroco Vintage in the top category, even though I probably wouldn't use it for myself. But again, we discussed how that's for a very specific use case, whenever I need something like machine washable as a gift knit. My dog loves her sweater, so I'm happy with that as long as we discussed the use cases and caveat. Okay, that was a really fun exercise. Thank you for being here. I have no idea how long I've been talking, so I'm super excited to edit this. If you do have questions about any of these yarns or about any of the objects that I put up pictures of, like I said, I will link to my Everything I Knit in 2025 video so that you can go reference those garments, but also feel free to leave me any questions that you have about things that I showed.